Growing up, my world was defined by shadows and silhouettes. My mother, Vanessa, was a constant silhouette, always in the background but never quite reaching the spotlight she craved. Our small apartment seemed to echo with her sighs of frustration and the soft click of her high heels as she left for another night out, chasing dreams of marriage and stability. Most evenings were the same. She would come home from work, change into a dress that clung to her slender frame, apply her makeup meticulously, and spray on a cloud of perfume that lingered long after she left. She would pause at the mirror, adjusting a strand of hair or adding a touch more lipstick, and then turn to me with a mixture of hope and desperation in her eyes. "Ellie, be good tonight, okay?" she would say, her voice almost pleading. "I'll be back late. There's some dinner in the fridge." I would nod, already knowing the routine. "Okay, Mom, I'll be fine." Her lips would curl into a strained smile, and with a final glance in the mirror, she would disappear into the night. I would watch her go, the door closing softly behind her, and then turn back to the quiet apartment. Left alone, I would make myself a simple meal, usually something like a peanut butter sandwich or a bowl of cereal. The apartment was always eerily silent, the only sounds being the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of the floorboards. I would sit at the small kitchen table, my legs swinging back and forth, trying to fill the void with the noise of the television or the pages of a book. One night, as I was finishing my dinner, there was a knock on the door. My heart skipped a beat. Unexpected visitors were rare. I cautiously approached the door and peered through the peephole. It was Mrs. Jenkins, our elderly neighbor from down the hall. "Ellie, sweetheart, it's Mrs. Jenkins. Can I come in for a moment?" she called out, her voice muffled by the door. I opened the door and smiled up at her. "Hi, Mrs. Jenkins, sure, come in." She stepped inside, her eyes scanning the empty apartment. "Where's your mother, dear?" "Out," I replied simply. "She'll be back late." Mrs. Jenkins sighed and patted my shoulder. "You're such a good girl, Ellie. Do you need anything? Aren't you hungry?" "I'm okay," I said, though the concern in her eyes made me feel a pang of loneliness. "All right, but if you need anything, you know where I am," she said gently. "Don't hesitate to knock, okay?" "Okay, thank you, Mrs. Jenkins." As she left, I closed the door and leaned against it, feeling a mix of gratitude and sadness. Mrs. Jenkins' kindness was a small comfort, but it couldn't fill the void left by my mother's absence. The nights Vanessa did bring someone home were the worst. The men were often strangers, their faces blurred in my memory. They would laugh and talk loudly, their voices a harsh contrast to the usual silence. I would retreat to my room, closing the door tightly and burying myself under the covers, pretending I was somewhere else. One such night, I overheard a conversation through the thin walls. Vanessa was speaking to a man, her voice tinged with frustration. "Why can't you just accept Ellie?" she asked, her tone pleading. "She's a good girl." "It's not that simple, Vanessa," the man replied gruffly. "I didn't sign up to be a father." "She's not asking for a father," Vanessa snapped. "She just needs a little kindness." There was a long silence, and then the man sighed. "I'll think about it." The next morning, the man was gone, and Vanessa was more distant than ever. She barely looked at me as she made coffee, her eyes shadowed with disappointment. "Did he leave because of me?" I asked softly, unable to bear the silence any longer. Vanessa's gaze flicked to me, her expression unreadable. "No, Ellie, it's not your fault." "But it feels like it is," I whispered. She sighed, setting down her coffee cup. "It's not, honey. Some people just can't handle responsibility." I nodded, though her words did little to ease the ache in my chest. I wished I could be invisible, that I could disappear and let my mother have the life she wanted. But I was there, a constant reminder of her past and an obstacle to her future. Despite everything, there were moments when Vanessa would show glimpses of the mother I longed for. One evening, as she was getting ready to go out, she caught me watching her from the doorway. "Do you like this dress, Ellie?" she asked, twirling slightly. I smiled. "You look beautiful, Mom." Her eyes softened, and she walked over to me, kneeling down to my level. "Thank you, sweetheart. You always know just what to say." For a brief moment, I felt a connection, a spark of hope that things could be different. But then she stood up, the moment passing as quickly as it had come, and with a final kiss on my forehead, she was gone again. And so, I continued to live in the shadows and silhouettes, my mother's dreams casting long shadows over my own. I learned to be strong, to fend for myself, and to find solace in the small acts of kindness from those around me. But deep down, I yearned for the day when I would no longer be an obstacle, but a cherished part of someone's life. My life changed dramatically when my mother married Steve, a man who seemed more interested in the idea of a ready-made family than in the reality of one. Steve was tall, with a booming voice and a smile that never quite reached his eyes. He moved in with us, bringing a sense of authority that was both foreign and unsettling. Not long after their wedding, my mother gave birth to twins, Emma and Ethan. Overnight, I became a little mother, responsible for their care while Vanessa and Steve pursued their own interests. It was overwhelming, and the weight of responsibility was heavy on my small shoulders. "Ellie, could you get Emma's bottle ready?" Vanessa called from the living room one morning, her voice barely audible over the twins' cries. I hurried to the kitchen, reaching up to the counter where the bottles were kept. My hands trembled slightly as I measured the formula, the cries of the babies amplifying my anxiety. I had just turned 7, but I felt much older, the demands of caring for the twins aging me beyond my years. I returned to the living room with the bottle, handing it to Vanessa, who was sprawled on the couch. "Here you go, Mom." She took the bottle without looking at me, her attention focused on the television. "Thanks, Ellie. Can you also check on Ethan? I think he needs a diaper change." I nodded and went to the playpen where Ethan lay fussing. His tiny face was scrunched up, tears streaming down his cheeks. I gently picked him up, carrying him to the changing table. The routine had become second nature to me, and I worked quickly, trying to soothe him with soft whispers. "It's okay, Ethan." "I'm here," I murmured, my voice calm despite the chaos around me. Steve was often absent, working long hours and spending his free time out with friends. When he was home, he seemed more like a distant observer than a participant in our lives. One evening, as I was struggling to get both twins to sleep, he walked into the nursery, his presence filling the small room. "How's it going, Ellie?" he asked, his tone more curious than concerned. "It's okay," I replied, rocking Emma in my arms while keeping an eye on Ethan in his crib. "They're almost asleep." Steve nodded, leaning against the doorframe. "You're doing a good job, kid. Keep it up." "Thanks," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. As he left, I felt a pang of loneliness. His words were meant to be encouraging, but they only highlighted the absence of genuine care. I was doing the job of a parent, yet I was still just a child myself. School became my escape, though not an easy one. I was often tired, my clothes worn and my supplies lacking. My classmates didn't understand my situation, and their whispers and stares made me feel even more isolated. But there was one bright spot, Mrs. Thompson, my teacher. She noticed my struggles and quietly slipped me supplies, her kindness a lifeline in a world that often felt indifferent. One day, as the bell rang to signal the end of recess, Mrs. Thompson approached me while I was packing up my books. "Ellie, can I speak with you for a moment?" she asked, her voice gentle. I nodded, feeling a mix of curiosity and apprehension. We walked to her desk, and she handed me a small bag filled with pencils, notebooks, and other supplies. "I noticed you might be running low on some things," she said, her eyes kind. "I hope this helps." Tears welled up in my eyes as I accepted the bag. "Thank you, Mrs. Thompson. It means a lot." "You're very welcome, Ellie. If you ever need anything, don't hesitate to ask, okay?" I nodded, feeling a warmth spread through me. "Okay, I will." Despite the challenges at home, I found solace in those small acts of kindness. They reminded me that I wasn't completely alone, that there were people who cared. One particularly rough evening, after a long day of school and caring for the twins, I was in the kitchen preparing a simple dinner of macaroni and cheese. Vanessa and Steve were arguing in the living room, their voices rising and falling in a familiar pattern. "I can't keep doing this, Steve," Vanessa shouted, her voice edged with frustration. "I'm tired." "And you think I'm not?" Steve retorted. "We're both working hard here, Vanessa. Ellie can handle it." I winced at his words, the pressure of their expectations weighing heavily on me. I stirred the macaroni, trying to block out their argument, but their voices seemed to grow louder. "We can't just rely on Ellie for everything," Vanessa yelled. "She's a child, not a nanny." Then maybe you should step up more, Steve shot back. I finished making dinner and set the table, my movements mechanical. The twins were unusually quiet, sensing the tension in the air. I fed them their bottles and put them to bed, the arguments still echoing in my mind. Later that night, after Vanessa and Steve had gone to bed, I sat alone in the living room, the weight of the day pressing down on me. The silence was a stark contrast to the earlier chaos, and I felt a deep sense of exhaustion. Tears prickled at the corners of my eyes, and I let them fall, the release a small comfort. As I wiped my eyes, I made a promise to myself. I would continue to be strong for Emma and Ethan, to give them the love and care they needed. But I also vowed to find a way to build a better future for myself, one where I wasn't burdened by the responsibilities of others. And so, I embraced my role as the little mother, finding strength in the small victories and kindnesses that came my way. Despite the challenges, I held on to the hope that someday things would be different. Someday, I would find a place where I truly belonged. One day, Steve announced that he wanted to transfer me to another school. He claimed it was better for me, but I knew the truth. He wanted to get rid of me, to erase the reminder of a life before him. Panic gripped me at the thought of losing Mrs. Thompson and the small sense of stability I had at school. It was a warm Saturday afternoon, and I was in the kitchen, preparing snacks for Emma and Ethan. Vanessa and Steve were sitting at the dining table, engaged in a serious conversation that hushed when I entered the room. I could feel their eyes on me, a mix of irritation and something else I couldn't quite place. "Ellie, come here for a second," Steve said, his tone neutral but firm. I hesitated, setting down the plates of apple slices before walking over to the table. "Yes. We've been talking," he began, glancing at Vanessa, who avoided my gaze. "And we think it might be best for you to transfer to a different school." My heart dropped. "Why?" "I like my school." Steve sighed, as if explaining something obvious. "This new school has better programs, more opportunities. It'll be good for you." Vanessa finally looked at me, her eyes tired. "We just want what's best for you, Ellie." "But I don't want to go," I said, my voice small but resolute. "Mrs. Thompson helps me a lot, and I have friends there." Steve's expression hardened. "This isn't up for discussion. We've already started the process. You'll be transferring next month." I stood there, stunned and helpless. The twins' laughter from the other room felt distant, almost mocking. I looked at Vanessa, hoping for some support, but she just looked away. I knew then that this decision was final, and there was nothing I could do to change their minds. That night, I couldn't sleep. I tossed and turned, my mind racing with thoughts of leaving my school, my friends, and Mrs. Thompson. The idea of starting over in a new place, with new people who didn't know or care about my struggles, was terrifying. The more I thought about it, the more desperate I became. I had to do something. The next morning, while Vanessa and Steve were still asleep, I packed a small bag with the essentials: a change of clothes, a few snacks, and my favorite book. I slipped out of the apartment, my heart pounding with fear and determination. I didn't have a plan, just a desperate need to escape. The city was still waking up, the streets quiet and empty. I walked quickly, my eyes darting around, trying to avoid any familiar faces. I wandered for hours, the fear of being caught driving me forward. Eventually, exhaustion caught up with me, and I found a bench in a small park to rest. Tears blurred my vision, and I wondered if I had made a terrible mistake. As I sat there, feeling lost and alone, a voice cut through the silence. "Ellie, is that you?" I looked up to see a man with kind eyes and a worried expression. He looked familiar, but I couldn't place him. "Yes," I whispered, my voice trembling. "I'm Daniel," he said softly. "I'm your father." Reconnection and revelation. Daniel's presence was like a lifeline thrown to a drowning person. I had always known about him, but he had been a distant figure in my life, someone my mother rarely spoke of. As he led me to his car, I felt a strange mix of fear and hope. Could this really be happening? Could I find the love and care I had always longed for? We drove in silence for a while, the city passing by in a blur. Finally, Daniel spoke, his voice gentle. "I know this must be overwhelming for you, Ellie. I can only imagine what you've been through." I looked at him, my eyes wide and filled with questions. "Why are you here? How did you find me?" Daniel sighed, his grip on the steering wheel tightening. I've been trying to get in touch with your mother for years, but she never responded. When I found out about the custody battle, I knew I had to find you." "But why now?" I asked, my voice breaking. "Why not earlier?" He glanced at me, his eyes filled with regret. "I made mistakes, Ellie. I should have fought harder to be in your life. But I'm here now, and I want to make things right." As we pulled up to a cozy house on a quiet street, I felt a sense of cautious hope. Daniel led me inside, where a woman with warm eyes and a welcoming smile greeted us. "Ellie, this is Grace, my wife," Daniel said, his voice softening. Grace knelt down to my level, her smile genuine. "Hi, Ellie. It's so nice to finally meet you. We've been waiting for this moment for a long time." Tears filled my eyes as I realized that this might be the new beginning I had been longing for. Daniel and Grace led me to a cozy bedroom, decorated with soft colors and a bed that looked incredibly inviting. "You can stay here as long as you need," Daniel said, his voice steady. "We're going to fight for you, Ellie. We're going to make sure you have the life you deserve." Over the next few days, Daniel and Grace listened to my story, their expressions shifting from sorrow to anger to determination. They promised to fight for custody, and I saw a glimmer of hope in their eyes that mirrored my own. My mother and Steve were furious when they found out where I was, but Daniel stood his ground. He fought for custody, and after a long and painful battle, the court ruled in his favor. I became his official daughter, a moment that felt like a dream come true. Embracing a new life. Life with Daniel and Grace was everything I had ever hoped for and more. They enrolled me in a new school, one where I wasn't known as the girl with the neglectful mother, but simply as Ellie. I made friends, real friends who liked me for who I was, not despite my circumstances. At home, I was part of a real family. Daniel and Grace treated me with kindness and respect, and they included me in everything. We had family dinners, game nights, and lazy Sundays filled with laughter and love. For the first time in my life, I felt seen and valued. One evening, as we sat around the dinner table, Grace reached out and took my hand. "Ellie, we're so proud of you. You've been through so much, and you're still so strong." Daniel nodded, his eyes filled with pride. "You've brought so much joy into our lives, Ellie. We're lucky to have you." I smiled, feeling a warmth spread through me. "I'm lucky to have you too." And with that, I finally felt at home, surrounded by the love and care I had always longed for. The unseen battle had been fought, and I had emerged victorious, ready to embrace my new life with open arms. Moving in with Daniel and Grace was like stepping into a new world, one filled with warmth and affection that I had only dreamed of. Their house was cozy, with pictures on the walls and a lived-in feel that made me feel welcome from the start. They both worked hard to make me feel at home, and their kindness began to chip away at the walls I had built around my heart. In the first few days, Daniel and I spent a lot of time talking. He wanted to understand everything about my life with Vanessa and Steve, and I found myself opening up to him in a way I had never been able to with anyone else. One evening, we sat on the porch, the sun setting in a blaze of orange and pink. Daniel looked at me with a mixture of sadness and determination. "Ellie, I want you to know that I'm here for you now," he said, his voice steady. "I regret not being there sooner, but I promise you, I'm here to stay." I looked at him, the sincerity in his eyes making me feel a surge of hope. "Why didn't you try to find me before?" I asked, my voice tinged with the pain of years of abandonment. Daniel sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "I did try, Ellie, but your mother made it difficult. She didn't want me in your life, and I didn't fight hard enough. I thought I was doing the right thing, respecting her wishes, but I realize now that I should have fought for you." The weight of his words settled over me, and for the first time, I felt a flicker of understanding. I just wanted to know that someone cared. Daniel's eyes softened, and he reached out to take my hand. "I care, Ellie. And so does Grace. We're going to do everything we can to make up for lost time." Grace joined us then, bringing out a tray of cookies and glasses of milk. She sat down beside me, her presence calming. "How are you feeling, Ellie?" she asked, her voice gentle. "Better," I admitted. "It's just a lot to take in." Grace nodded, her eyes filled with empathy. "We understand. Take your time. We're here for you, no matter what." Their words and actions over the next few weeks reinforced their promises. They enrolled me in a new school and helped me catch up on my studies, Grace spent hours with me, going over homework and encouraging me to do my best. She was patient and kind, and her gentle guidance helped me find my footing. One afternoon, as we sat at the kitchen table working on a science project, Grace looked up at me with a smile. "You know, Ellie, you're really smart. You catch on so quickly." I blushed, unused to such praise. "Thanks, Grace. I just never had anyone to help me before." She reached over and squeezed my hand. "Well, you have us now, and we're not going anywhere." At school, things were different too. I was no longer the girl with the worn clothes and the absent parents. I was just Ellie, a new student with a chance to start over. I made friends with a group of kids who accepted me for who I was, and for the first time, I felt like I belonged. One day during lunch, I was sitting with my new friends, Emily and Jack, when Emily asked about my family. "So, Ellie, what do your parents do?" I hesitated, the old habit of secrecy hard to break. But then I remembered Daniel and Grace's encouragement to be open and honest. "Well, I live with my dad and stepmom now. My dad works in construction, and my stepmom is a teacher." "That's cool," Jack said, nodding. "Your dad sounds awesome." "He is," I said, smiling. "They're both really great." As the weeks turned into months, I grew closer to Daniel and Grace. We shared meals, played games, and went on weekend trips to the park or the movies. They made sure I knew I was a part of their family, and their love began to heal the wounds left by years of neglect. One evening, as we sat around the dinner table, Grace looked at me with a thoughtful expression. "Ellie, we've been thinking. How would you feel about officially changing your last name to ours?" The question took me by surprise, and I felt a lump form in my throat. "Really?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Daniel reached out and took my hand. "Yes, really. We want you to know that you're a permanent part of our family. We love you, Ellie." Tears filled my eyes, and I nodded, unable to speak. Grace came around the table and hugged me, and for the first time in my life, I felt truly and completely loved. As the paperwork was finalized and my name officially changed, I felt a sense of belonging that I had never known before. I was no longer just Ellie, the girl who had to fend for herself. I was Ellie Thompson, a cherished daughter and sister, part of a family that loved and supported me. A reunion with my past. One Saturday, as we were getting ready for a family outing to the zoo, there was a knock on the door. Daniel opened it to reveal Vanessa standing on the porch, her eyes wide and desperate. "Ellie," she said, her voice shaking, "can I talk to you?" I froze, the sight of her bringing back a flood of memories. Daniel stepped forward, his protective instincts kicking in. "Vanessa, what are you doing here?" "I just need to talk to Ellie," she pleaded. "Please." Daniel looked at me, his eyes asking for my permission. I nodded slowly, and he stepped aside to let her in. Vanessa walked into the living room, looking around at the cozy space that had become my home. She turned to me, her eyes filled with tears. "Ellie, I know I haven't been a good mother. I made so many mistakes, and I'm so sorry." I stood there, my emotions a whirlwind of anger, sadness, and a flicker of hope. "Why now, Mum? Why are you here?" She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. "I've been going to therapy, trying to get my life together. I know I can't undo the past, but I want to make amends. I want to be part of your life if you'll let me." Grace came to stand beside me, her presence a comforting support. "Ellie, it's your choice. Whatever you decide, we'll support you." I looked at Vanessa, seeing the sincerity in her eyes. Part of me wanted to forgive her, to give her a chance to be the mother I had always needed. But I also knew that I couldn't let her back into my life without boundaries. "I appreciate that you're trying to change, Mom," I said slowly. "But you have to understand, I've been hurt a lot. I need time to trust you again." Vanessa nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I understand. I'll give you all the time you need. I just want you to know that I love you, Ellie, and I'm here if you ever want to talk." As she left, I felt a sense of closure and a new beginning. The unseen battle of my past had shaped me, but it no longer defined me. I was ready to move forward, with Daniel and Grace by my side, and with the hope that someday I might be able to fully reconnect with my mother. The official adoption papers came through on a crisp autumn day, a day that marked not just a legal change, but an emotional one as well. I was no longer just Ellie. I was now Ellie Thompson, the official daughter of Daniel and Grace. It felt like a rebirth, a shedding of old skin and stepping into a new, brighter future. We celebrated that evening with a small party at home. Grace had decorated the living room with balloons and streamers, and Daniel had picked up a cake from my favorite bakery. They had even invited some of my new friends from school. The atmosphere was filled with laughter and joy, a stark contrast to the somber, intense gatherings of my past. As we sat around the dining table, eating cake and sharing stories, I felt a warmth spread through me. This was what family was supposed to feel like. "Ellie," Daniel said, raising his glass of sparkling cider, "we are so proud of you. You've been through so much, and you've come out stronger. Welcome officially to the Thompson family." Everyone raised their glasses, and I felt tears welling up in my eyes. "Thank you," I said, my voice choked with emotion. "I couldn't have done it without all of you." Grace smiled, reaching over to squeeze my hand. "We're the lucky ones, Ellie. You've brought so much joy into our lives." After the guests left and the house was quiet, I found myself sitting on the porch with Daniel and Grace, the cool night air wrapping around us like a comforting blanket. "Do you remember the first time we sat out here?" Daniel asked, his voice soft. I nodded. "I was so scared and unsure, but you made me feel safe." "You are safe, Ellie," Grace said, her voice filled with conviction. "And you always will be." The next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity as I adjusted to my new identity and the stability it brought. School became less of a challenge and more of an opportunity. With Daniel and Grace's support, I excelled in my classes and even joined the school's art club, something I had always wanted to do but never had the chance. One afternoon, as I was working on a painting in the art room, Emily walked over, her eyes curious. "Hey, Ellie, that looks amazing. What inspired you?" I looked at the canvas, a vibrant depiction of a sunset over a calm ocean. "It's kind of like my life right now," I said with a smile. "A new beginning." Emily grinned. "I'm glad you're happy. You deserve it." At home, things continued to improve. Daniel and Grace encouraged me to pursue my interests, and our bond grew stronger each day. We spent weekends exploring new places, from museums to parks, and each outing was filled with laughter and love. One Saturday, we decided to go hiking in the nearby mountains. The trail was challenging, but the view at the top was worth it. As we stood there, looking out over the valley below, I felt a sense of accomplishment and peace. "This is beautiful," I said, my voice filled with awe. "Just like you," Daniel said, wrapping an arm around my shoulders. Grace nodded, her eyes shining with pride. "You've come so far, Ellie. We're so proud of you." As we made our way back down the trail, I realized how much my life had changed. The shadows of my past no longer haunted me. Instead, they had become a part of my story, a testament to my resilience and strength. One evening, as we were sitting in the living room, Grace brought up an idea that had been on her mind. "Ellie, we've been thinking about something. How would you feel about visiting your old neighborhood?" The question took me by surprise, and I felt a mix of emotions. "Why?" "We think it might help you find closure," Daniel explained, "to see how far you've come." I nodded slowly. "Okay, I think I'd like that." A week later, we drove to my old neighborhood. The streets were just as I remembered, but they no longer held the same power over me. We parked in front of my old apartment building, and I stood there, taking it all in. "It feels different," I said, turning to Daniel and Grace. "Smaller somehow." Grace nodded, her expression understanding. "That's because you've grown, Ellie. You're not the same person you were when you lived here." As we walked around, I realized how much I had changed. The memories were still there, but they no longer defined me. I had a new life, a new family, and a future filled with possibilities. We ended the visit at a small park where I used to play. I sat on a swing, the same swing I had sat on countless times before, but this time it felt different. I felt free. Daniel and Grace sat on either side of me, their presence a comforting reminder of how far I had come. "Thank you," I said, my voice filled with gratitude. "For everything." "Thank you for letting us be a part of your life," Daniel replied, his voice thick with emotion. Grace nodded, tears in her eyes. "We love you, Ellie, more than words can say." As we left the old neighborhood and headed back to our new home, I felt a sense of closure and a renewed sense of hope. The past was a part of me, but it no longer defined me. I had a new beginning, filled with love and support, and I was ready to embrace whatever the future held. That night, as I lay in bed, I thought about the journey that had brought me here. It hadn't been easy, but every step had led me to this moment. I was Ellie Thompson, a beloved daughter, a sister, and a friend. And for the first time in my life, I felt truly at home. With my new identity firmly in place, I found myself looking forward to the future with a sense of excitement and possibility I had never known before. The shadows of my past still lingered, but they were no longer the dominant force in my life. I was ready to embrace the opportunities ahead and make the most of my second chance. As winter approached, Daniel and Grace surprised me with news that filled me with a mix of nerves and excitement. "Ellie," Daniel said one evening as we sat around the dinner table, "we've been talking and we think it's time to take a family trip. How do you feel about going to the mountains for a week?" I looked up from my plate, my heart racing. "The mountains? For a whole week?" Grace nodded, her eyes sparkling with enthusiasm. "Yes, we thought it would be a great way to spend some quality time together and make some new memories." I felt a surge of excitement. "That sounds amazing. I've never been on a real vacation before." Daniel smiled, reaching over to squeeze my hand. "Well, get ready for an adventure then." The trip to the mountains was everything I had hoped for and more. We stayed in a cozy cabin with a roaring fireplace and large windows that looked out onto snow-covered pine trees. Each day was filled with activities like skiing, snowball fights, and exploring the nearby trails. The laughter and joy we shared made me feel more connected to Daniel and Grace than ever before. One afternoon, as we hiked up a trail to a frozen waterfall, Daniel pulled me aside. "Ellie, there's something I want to talk to you about." I looked at him curious. "What is it?" He took a deep breath, his expression serious. "Grace and I have been discussing our future, and we realized that there's something missing. We want to officially adopt you, to make you our daughter in every sense of the word." Tears filled my eyes as I processed his words. "Really? You want to adopt me?" "Yes," Daniel said, his voice filled with emotion. "We love you, Ellie. You've become such an important part of our lives, and we want to make it official." I hugged him tightly, overwhelmed with happiness. "I would love that. Thank you, Dad." He hugged me back, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for being a part of our family." Grace joined us then, her smile radiant. "What do you say, Ellie? Are you ready to become a Thompson officially?" I nodded, tears streaming down my face. "Yes, absolutely." The trip to the mountains not only strengthened our bond, but also gave me the courage to face the challenges ahead. Returning to school after the winter break, I felt more confident and ready to take on new opportunities. I joined the school's drama club, something I had always been interested in but had never had the chance to pursue. One afternoon, as I was rehearsing for the upcoming school play, my drama teacher, Mrs. Reynolds, approached me. "Ellie, you have a real talent for acting. Have you ever considered pursuing it further?" I blushed, surprised by her praise. "I love it, but I never thought I was good enough." Mrs. Reynolds smiled warmly. "You are more than good enough. I think you should audition for the lead role in our next play. I believe you have what it takes." The idea both thrilled and terrified me, but I knew I had to try. With Daniel and Grace's encouragement, I threw myself into rehearsals, determined to give it my all. The night of the auditions, they were both there, their presence giving me the strength to perform with confidence. When the cast list was posted, I couldn't believe my eyes. I had been chosen for the lead role. I ran home to share the news with Daniel and Grace, my heart bursting with joy. "Guess what?" I said, bursting through the front door. "I got the lead role." Grace hugged me tightly. "We knew you could do it, Ellie. We're so proud of you." Daniel grinned, his pride evident. "This is just the beginning, Ellie. You have so much potential, and we can't wait to see where it takes you." As my confidence grew, so did my friendships. Emily, Jack, and I became inseparable, sharing lunches, study sessions, and weekend adventures. They supported me through the play rehearsals, cheering me on and helping me practice my lines. One evening, we were sitting in my room, going over the script, when Emily looked at me thoughtfully. "Ellie, you've changed so much since we first met. It's like you're a completely different person." I smiled, thinking about the journey I had been on. "I guess I have." "A lot has happened." and I've finally found a place where I belong." Jack nodded, his eyes sincere. "We're glad you're part of our lives, Ellie. You've made a big difference." Their words touched my heart, and I realized just how far I had come. I was no longer the girl who was overlooked and forgotten. I had friends who cared about me, a family that loved me, and a future filled with possibilities. The night of the school play was a culmination of all the hard work and growth I had experienced. Standing backstage, I felt a mixture of nerves and excitement. Daniel and Grace were in the audience, along with Emily, Jack, and a few other friends. I took a deep breath, reminding myself of all the support I had. As the curtain rose and I stepped onto the stage, the nerves melted away, replaced by a sense of confidence and joy. I poured my heart into my performance, losing myself in the character and the story. The applause at the end was thunderous, and I felt a rush of pride and accomplishment. After the show, Daniel and Grace found me backstage, their faces beaming with pride. "You were amazing, Ellie," Daniel said, hugging me tightly. "I knew you could do it." Grace nodded, tears in her eyes. "We're so proud of you, sweetheart. You shone up there." Emily and Jack joined us, their excitement infectious. "You were incredible, Ellie," Emily said, her eyes wide with admiration. "I knew you were talented, but wow." Jack nodded in agreement. "You nailed it. We're so proud of you." Their support meant the world to me, and I realized that I had truly embraced the future. I had a family, friends, and a newfound sense of self-worth. The past would always be a part of me, but it no longer defined me. I was ready to face whatever came next with courage and confidence. As the school year drew to a close, I found myself reflecting on all that had happened. The journey had been difficult, filled with challenges and obstacles, but it had also been rewarding and transformative. I had discovered strengths I didn't know I had, built meaningful relationships, and found a place where I truly belonged. One evening, as we sat around the dinner table, Daniel looked at me with a thoughtful expression. "Ellie, have you thought about what you want to do after high school?" I nodded, a smile spreading across my face. "I want to go to college and study theater. I want to keep acting and see where it takes me." Grace's eyes lit up with excitement. "That's a wonderful idea, Ellie. You have so much talent, and college would be a great opportunity for you to grow and learn even more." Daniel nodded in agreement. "We'll support you every step of the way. Whatever you choose to do, we're behind you." Their unwavering support filled me with gratitude and determination. I knew that with them by my side, I could achieve anything I set my mind to. The future was bright and filled with possibilities, and I was ready to embrace it with open arms. As I lay in bed that night, I thought about the journey that had brought me here. From the shadows of my past to the warmth of my new family, I had grown and changed in ways I never thought possible. I had found strength, love, and a sense of belonging that I had always longed for. I was Ellie Thompson, a daughter, a friend, and an aspiring actress. My future was filled with endless possibilities, and I was ready to embrace each and every one of them. With Daniel and Grace by my side, I knew that anything was possible. The past was behind me, and the future was mine to shape. I was ready to embrace it with all the hope and courage in my heart.